In this video, we are using Python to make a Pokemon clone. We add a little house for our player, we add a different starting position, we add some new buildings in, and we add an NPC that we can go up and talk to, and we add some starters that we can choose from. The battle screen gets updated. And we add a new level that our player can go to, as well as scrolling along the x-axis. If you want to know how you can do all of this and more in Python, keep watching. Alright everyone, we have lots to get to in this tutorial, so let's go into it. For this tutorial, I've already gone through and updated some of our assets. So in the images, I've already added some new images. We'll go over those first. Of course, I've grabbed some new images from our boy Kenny Assets. There will be a link in the description and on the GitHub. I've also gone to Kelvin Shadewing and gotten some of his buildings. These are some of the buildings that I've grabbed from him, link in the description. And I've also added a few that I created myself just to spice things up a little bit, make it a little nicer. Added a new menu as well. So those are the images. On the kind of other assets, I've added a new map that we'll add in. I've modified the existing map, added some new tiles and properties. We'll discuss those when we get into the coding. I've added a new font. We're going to use that in Pygame. And then on the config, I've added some new values in here that we're going to use throughout the coding. And I've added this map config, which is just going to give us more information about each map that we're loading in the game. There's 2 maps currently. And I've added this room config, which will give us some information about the various rooms that we go into. These two maybe should be the same config object, but for now they're separated. Okay, so with all that said, I think the best thing to do is to run the actual game, and we'll get some errors and then we'll fix those. So let's right click on the main, and hit run main. We got our fancy new menu. These are going to be our starter Pokemon, so that's why they're there. And same thing, you hit enter, and there's our first crash. So we're reading in some of these tiles from this map that I've modified, and we haven't dealt with those yet. So we need to deal with the dots and with the numbers. So there's dots down here and dots up here. These are going to be our buildings. And I want the dots to say that it's impassable. And I want the doors to lead to a room. So let's start with that dot. It's going to be in our config already, I believe, where we have a map tile building. And then we also have this impassable type. So let's look where we're looking for the map tile water. And if we find, we're going to replace that check. So I can't actually find where it is currently, which is no problem. We're just going to go back to the config, and we're going to do a find all references on this map tile water. It's this find usages here, and that's going to show us where. So not this one, that's the one we're looking at. This one here. So this is going to be in our game when we're moving a unit. We're basically saying, hey, if it's this config.map tile water, then we don't want to go there. So we're going to switch that, and we're going to say if it's in config.impassable. So now we're just saying, is this map tile that we're in, is it in that impassable array that we have in our config? So now we can make rocks impassable, we can make different types of water, anything that we want impassable, and what we've done here is made buildings impassable. So when we run that, we're still going to get a crash, but let's go to that next crash. Okay, so again, we can go with the stack trace, go to the latest position. So now we're trying to load the image for this period. However, it's not contained. So in this case, we actually just want to skip it. So we're going to say if tile not in map underscore tile image, then we're just gonna continue this for loop, but we also want to still push our X position. So what this means is when we're going through here, we're going to be drawing grass, water, road. When we get to here, we're going to say, oh, we don't have a tile to draw here, so we're just going to continue. We're not going to draw anything, but we're going to go to the next position, the next X position. So let's see if that lets us run now. And it does. So we can see that impassable area there is just kind of blocked out. So we have an attack. So we're gonna be moving around this map quite a bit. So let's quickly make 2 changes that allow us to move around a little bit faster. So the first thing is I want to not always have to move by 1 position. In here, when we go up, down, A and D, all these, we're just gonna copy that. We're gonna put in a comment. These are for debug. We're going to paste that, and then we're going to replace these with the arrow keys. K underscore up, K underscore down. That's left as well. I think this is supposed to be left, right? So we can fix that. K underscore left, key underscore right. Okay, so now if we're using the arrow keys, which it won't be in the actual game, but what we're going to do is we're going to modify these positions by 10. That just allows us to move around the map much faster. Let's run that. Sorry, one other thing that we want to do is in our game and our determine if Pokemon found. We only want to determine this if the player dot monster. So does our player currently have a monster? So we want to add a variable that our player is going to be carrying around a monster, and it's going to start with none, and it's actually going to have an array of monsters as well. So those won't be set at all, which is fine. All right, so in our game, instead of automatically determining if we found a Pokemon and should battle, we're first going to check that array to see if it's empty. A couple ways we can do that. We're just going to do if self dot player dot monsters, and it's going to return false if it's empty. Very Pythonic. Starting to learn the Python ways, I hope. So let's see if that works. So 2 things now. We should be able to move around without getting interrupted from the Pokemon battles for now, till we get our starter. We can't go into these buildings. And we can also move at light speed up and down. Okay. All right, so if we go back into our config file, let's see some of the other changes we have. I've added an array here of numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're going to use these numbers to tell us where the doors are in the map and which rooms that these doors should be going to. So in our game class, in determine game events, we're going to use that array. We are going to use that array to determine if we've walked into a door. So we can really put this anywhere in here. We haven't really gone through order yet, but what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, if the map tile is an integer, then what we're going to do is load the room that we just walked into. So let's add a comment on that and say if the map tile is a door, we need a room. Okay, so how do we test if this is an integer? Well, we're going to add a new utility method in our utilities class, and let's just call it test if int. And it will just take in a map tile. And then how we're going to do this is we're going to attempt to cast it to an integer just through Python. If it throws an exception, then it's not a integer. So that's going to be a try catch. So that's just basically try, turn the map tile into an integer. If that was okay, nothing went wrong, we don't care about what the value is right now, then we just return true. But if it failed, so we're going to expect or exception, and we're expecting it to be a value error, we're going to return false. No, it's not an integer. Okay, so we now need to use that utilities class. So if utilities.testifInteger map tile, then we need a new room. So a room is just going to be a type of map. So a map takes in the screen so that it can handle its rendering. And then we are going to call a load method. Currently, I think we have a load method for maps. Let's just confirm that. So we have a load, and this is specific for the map. It goes through the map file name. We're now going to add in a new method, load_room, because it's going to be slightly different. Passes, we'll implement it in a little bit. So we'll just call room.loadRoom. And what are we going to pass into it? We are going to pass into it the game's current map file name. Which I don't know if we've saved that. So we're not currently saving that, so we're just going to go in here and save that file name. Because how it's basically going to work is that map 1 is going to have room 1, room 2, room 3, but map 2 might have room 1, room 2, room 3, etc. Since we've built our maps this way, obviously there can only be 9 buildings or rooms per map. So basically we can pass into the room, hey, this is the room in map 4, and it's the second room in that map. That's why we now need to save the file name of the actual map. I'm just going to call it that. And we should always initialize these just for best practice. So I'm going to set that to none at the start. So we're passing in the file name. We're also going to pass in the room number. What's the room number? That's just going to be our map tile. So 1, 2, 3, etc. We're also going to pass in the player because we do pass around quite a few things. In the previous video, we tried to take some state out of these game views, but we're going to put a little bit of state back in just for the sake of time. So this should actually be self because this is the game object. Okay, now in the last video what we did was we added the game object keeps track of which map it's currently rendering. So we are going to be assigning the new room as the map, because rooms and maps are going to be kind of the same thing, or they are the same object. But we also want now an array of maps to keep track of as well. So we can basically push a new map onto here and then pop it off. and it will have one item in that array at the start. So let's see, we create the room. Now we're going to set the self.map to that room, and we're going to push to the maps. So self.maps append, and we're going to push room in there. And since we're entering a new room, we don't need to determine if there's anything going on after that. We will just return. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, so we can't go in here because this is the impassable building. But if we go to the map, the door is right there. So it's right here. And there we go. We tried to load the room. Obviously that does not exist yet. So let's go in there and fix that. We need to modify that load room method to take in the map, the room, probably should be map name, room name, and the player. Okay, so we're going to set a variable of self.player is equal to this player. We will be doing some modification on this. We're going to have our objects as well in this. And it's going to be a new array of player, so we'll always have the player in the objects. So this self.objects is going to contain our npcs, our non-playable characters as well. Next, from that config file that we have, we're going to load some information about this room. So we're going to say room underscore config is equal to config dot room config. So let's go take a look at that. So room config is here. What is it telling us? Well, so this is the map key, so 0, 1. And this is the door key. So basically map 1, room 1, where does the player start? Where does the player go when it leaves this room? And what are the non-playable characters in this room? And so this first room that we're adding is going to be the lab that you go and get your starter Pokemons. So it's going to be a professor that's in there, and this is his start position. So let's load that data in. So we need to, it's a JSON object. We need to use this key to get which map we're talking about, and then we'll use another key to get which room we're talking about. So the first key is this map name that we passed in. Second key is going to be the room name. So it is this room name, but we also need to pad it with that 0. So we're going to call zfill, which just does a padding. Make sure that it's always going to be like 0, 1, 0, 2, etc. And this is going to be that array that we were looking at of all this stuff. So that's this object we currently have. What we can do is we can set our player's position to the start position. So dot position, that's equal to the room config, and we called it start position in the config. And we're going to copy the data over so that when we modify the player's position, we don't change the start position. The start position for this room will always be the same. We also want the exit position, which I don't think we have yet, but basically what this is, what this is saying is that when we exit this room, we want our player to go back to this position on the map. So we're calling it self.player.player exit position, and it's equal to the room config exit position. This won't be used immediately. We'll use it when we're exiting the room, when we add that logic in. The next thing we want to do is draw our NPCs. So we're going to say for npc underscore data in room config npcs, we want to create a new NPC, and this is going to be a new object that we haven't created yet. So let's go ahead and add a new file. We'll call it NPC. It's going to be very similar to the player, so we're just going to copy all that, paste it in, rename the file. So we're going to want to pass in an image for that NPC and a name. So let's add that in at the start. So we'll do name image self.name equals name, and self.image is going to be I don't think I need to cast that to image, but so an example of the prof, which is going to be the first one we create, the prof's name is prof, or his image is prof as well. That's going to be defined in the config. So name is prof, image is prof. We're going to pass it into this NPC object, and it's going to load that image. So we could change this at any point in the config. So that's pretty cool. We're also going to pass in his starting position, which is also coming from the config. So we're going to do npc underscore data, and the first thing was name. We'll use this again. Name, image, so start position. And we need to say which index for those, so X and Y. And that's all getting passed to this NPC object. We don't currently know what this NPC object is, so we're going to Alt enter and import it. We don't really have an update, but we'll just keep that for now. Update position, we probably won't call it, but no reason to remove it right now. And the rendering should be fine as well. So X position, Y position gets passed in. We draw the image. We might use this for an NPC, don't really know. Okay, so that's not gonna, we're not gonna be able to render this quite yet. If you remember, in our load object here, we loop through the map text file and add it to this map array. We're going to do the same thing, but for rooms. So let's copy this. And we will paste it in here. So we're going to now load from the rooms folder without caps lock. We're going to pass in the room name, which again is going to be this zfill. And we can call that room file, doesn't really matter. Now we're just going to loop through it and do the exact same thing. What does that room file look like? Well, very similar to the map. Now, since this is like a lab that we're entering, I've already gone and kind of determined what we're going to call them. So L will be the wall, L, large L, uppercase L will be the lab floor, and X is going to be like a doormat that you can enter onto to exit the room. So we're going to have to add those into our images. So we'll just copy this. I think that was something like three new tiles that I just mentioned. So let's go to the config and find those. So map tile, lab wall, lab floor, and room exit are the three I was thinking of. So grab the lab floor, paste that in, grab the lab wall, and the exit. And where are these going to point to? Well, if we go to our images, so not in our rooms. Oops, didn't mean to drag that. So the floor mat is going to be used for the lab, for the room exit. So we're going to call this floor_mat. Lab tile is going to be the floor. See it there. And lab wall we'll use for around the room as well. Okay, let's see what happens when we run this. I went ahead and ran the code. As you can see down here, we did hit an error. So there's actually an issue with my config. The room config, if we go down here, so basically we have the NPC character that is the professor, prof. His image is prof. And then we have these monster cage starters. So we have 1, 2, 3. The idea is that if we go to that room file, basically you're going to walk in here, the professor is going to be somewhere around here, and then 1, 2, 3, there's going to be 3 kind of starters that you can go up to and select. So that's the deal there. Now I actually changed the names of the images from when I originally did this. So we actually need to go in and add 01, or is it 1 as well? Let's see, what images do I have? So it's just 1. So these are going to be basically the starters that you get to pick from. So we need to update the configs. Maybe 1. _2 and _3 here. So now we will rerun, and we're going to head to that door. So we still get a crash. Let's see, no such file or directory, rooms01.txt. The reason why is we've separated each room file into a separate folder for each map. So if we go there, we just need to add in here another string. And it's going to come from the map name. I don't think we need to Z-fill those. And there we go, that's our room. Now can we exit? So we can't exit yet. So we'll add that in a little bit. But all right, why don't we do that right now? So in our game, determine game events, we're basically going to say if map tile equals and if it's equal to this exit, then what we want to do is this is our game object, so we're going to say self dot map equals, we're going to do self dot maps dot pop. That's gonna, so sorry, we're gonna pop the top map. So in this case, that's gonna be the room. We're gonna pop the room off the maps array, and then we are going to set the current map to the last element in the array. To get the last element in the array in Python, we do this -1 on the array. No error checking right now, but that's fine. Now, one other thing we need to do is we need to set the position of the player. So we're going to self.player.position is equal to the exit position from the current map. So self.map.player underscore exit underscore position, and copy that value. Now, as you can see, that didn't come up as an actual value that we have, so we need to add that to the map object. So in here, we're going to do self.player underscore exit underscore positions. So what are we doing here? Basically, what we're saying is when we go into a room, our player's at this position and he runs in. When he exits, we want the player to return to this position. So that will make sense when you see it in action here. So we're going to set that in the load room on the map object, and it's this player exit position, not on the player, but on the, I'm not sure that makes sense. We'll I don't know why we have two of them here. And it's singular here. And it is singular here. Okay, so let's see if that works. Go down, go across, up we go. Now if we enter into these areas, we should be able to exit. And we do, and as you can see, our player goes back directly to the position that we want him to. Great, so we have the room rendering, but we don't have these NPCs rendering. So let's see, where are we actually creating these? It should be in the map object. We should be creating an NPC, but we aren't doing anything. So it's not draw, this is create, if I can spell. And we'll do self.objects.append NPC. Okay, so after some digging, what I determined was that we are calling this render method, but we're actually passing in the game objects. So the game has its own objects array, and that's what we're passing in. That doesn't really make sense anymore, so we're actually going to remove that. Now again, this goes back to that previous video where we removed some of that state from here, which was a good thing, and now we're sticking it back into these game views. Not a great thing, but that's okay. So we don't need that because that's no longer a thing. We should have this initialized at the start. We're going to add that back in. So basically anywhere that we have these self.objects, we don't need anymore. So that looks like the only place. Now we can go into here. We can remove this out of there. And when we loop through this, we're actually going to just loop through our own self.objects. So each map will render its own objects. And we should, of course, initialize that array here to be an empty array. Okay, let's try that again. So we don't have anything on the main map. That's okay, because in the load, that would make sense. So we're going to pass that into the load as well, the player, and we're just going to copy this. Currently on the main map, the player is the only object, so that's fine. So just on the game, when we create that, so self.map.load01, we also need to pass in the player. Give that a run, and there's our player back. And here's our NPCs that we're now drawing. So this professor here is going to be the professor that goes and tells us the Pokemon to pick, and then these are going to be our starters. Currently, we can just walk right over them, and there's no collision, which is fine. So we need to add some collision detection with basically NPC characters. So that's going to be still in our determine game event, becoming quite a massive method. Should probably get pulled out of here, but what we're basically going to do is we're going to loop through all of our NPCs. So we're going to say for NPC in it should be self.map.objects. Directly accessing an array like that, not really the best thing, but that's okay. And we're going to say if NPC is equal to self.map.player, then we want to continue because you can't collide with yourself. And then we're just going to say, well, if the positions are the same, so if npc.position. Now I think to do that, I'm not really too into Python, but I think to determine if they're equal, we could just get us the values of the one position and the values of the player's positions and see if they're equal. Now, this probably isn't the most efficient. If there's a better way, let me know in the comments down below. But so basically, if these positions are equal, then we want to handle an event between these two players. See what event should be happening. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in a new directory. We're going to call it events because events are going to become a big thing now. And we're going to add in call it a game event handler. And this isn't going to be a class, it's just going to be a set of methods, and we're just going to set a method called def handle. And it's going to handle getting a player passed in, an NPC passed in, and we're also going to have to pass it in the game because we're going to need to know some of that state. And then here we're going to handle the events. So let's call that. We're going to say game underscore event underscore handler dot handle. Does that work? We import that name. We pass in the game, which is self. We pass in the self.player. And we pass in the NPC. So just to see if this is working, when we also don't want collision. So no, we can handle that in this handler. So in the handle event, for now, the only thing we'll do is we'll say player dot position is equal to player dot last position. So we don't currently have a last position. We're going to add that now in the player class. We basically just want a last underscore position. At the start it can be that, that's fine. And then when we update the position, what we're going to do is before we set the new position, we're going to say self.lastPosition is equal to the current position, and that's going to keep track of that last position. Then in the handler event, that's going to prevent us from having collisions with NPCs. In theory. Let's see if it works. I keep doing the wrong one. So object has no attribute last position. Yay for spelling. Give that another try. As you can see, when we handle that event, it sets us back. Now it is doing a weird thing where it is actually putting us there. And I think that's just based on when we're calling render versus handle events. So determine game events is happening after. So I think that should probably get moved. Like we should render after we handle the game events, because the game events could change. Okay, so now that we have this handler, what we can do is we can say, well, if the npc.name is equal to prof, well, then we want to, we basically want to be able to talk to the professor. We're going to create new events in here. And so let's just call this the prof pick monster event. So basically we talk to the prof and he's going to tell us you can pick a monster. So this it's going to be standard naming for these classes. Pick monster event self screen, because it's going to render itself. Sorry, this is not where we put this. Put this down here. Def underscore init and screen game and player. And we're going to say self dot screen is equal to screen, self dot game is equal to game. We're going to have an image, so self dot prof underscore image is equal to pygame dot image dot load. Might not even use this, I don't know. Images slash prof png. We need to import the pygame library. We're gonna have a dialog screen here, so just something to draw text on. So again, it's gonna be pygame.image.load. It's gonna be dialog, and this is kind of gonna be like a cutscene. So I don't know if this is probably not the best way to do it, but I'm gonna have a cutscene variable basically, and also a max cut. There's gonna be two cutscenes. We might want to load event at some point. We're gonna have a render. So we're basically gonna say render scene, and then we're gonna have if self.cut is equal to 0. We're gonna call a method we're gonna write in here to do all the rendering, which is gonna be render scene underscore 0. That's gonna be here, so self.render scene. And just copy that to elif. Oops. It's gonna be 1. That's gonna be 2. Okay, now we actually need these. So first thing, we're just gonna first draw our dialogue. So call self.screen lit self.dialog. So this dialog is the background. And we're going to render it at 0 and 300, which will be the bottom. And what we're going to do is we're going to load that new font I added. So font equals pygame.font dot sys font. No, we don't want that. So normally we would call sysfont, but now it's going to be .font, which means we can load our own. And we're going to say we're going to font slash this one. .ttf, and it's going to be size 20. Then we actually draw it. It's going to be font.render. And he's going to say, pick your Pokemon. Alias is true, and it will be a black text. And we draw that. We're going to draw it at the X location of 40 and way down on the screen at 400. So that's kind of the rendering of this first event. We're going to come back in here and fill these out later. Sorry, we actually need an update on the event as well. So basically now the update, each event will handle input as well so that we can get input from the user. I'm going to copy our standard update from the game as well, because we're going to need these as well. All these exits. So just copy. Those are all the exits, right? Yeah. So up until the key down and the quit, so that we can get out of the game from this event. Got to import that. So we can set the game state because, no, can't do that. We need self.game.gameState here. So since we passed in the game to the event, we can just exit the game. Same thing here. Okay, then the other thing is if they hit enter, we're going to basically go to the next cutscene. Return self.cut equals self.cut plus 1. So what's happening here? Basically, we have this new event that gets created in this event handler based on it being a prof. Oh, we haven't actually created it, so let's go ahead and create that. We're going to say event is equal to, it's going to be that specific event that we just created. In the game.screen. What else does it need? Game and player. You know, if we're passing around the game, probably doesn't make sense to pass around the player or screen either, but oh well. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically allow the game to have a event. So we're going to do game.event equals event. Now in the update and render for the game, we need to handle this. So let's go to the game, initialize the event to be none. And then in the update, if self.event is not none, then we don't want to handle any input in the game. So we just return. Okay, so basically at the end of this update, what we're going to do is we're going to say if self.event is not none, then we're going to update and render that event. So first render it, and then update it. Okay, we have written a lot of code. Let's see how this looks, see what errors we get. So we've only handled this prof event, and there we go. We go up to him, he says pick your Pokemon. So this is cutscene 0. If we hit enter, oh, it freezes. Yeah, it freezes. Okay, so I said if the event is not none, then we want to return, but that's actually incorrect. We do want still to call this update. That was our problem. We just don't want to handle events in the game. So we do want to update the game because that's what's actually calling our events, but we don't want to handle input. So let's try that again. So we're rendering through and we keep updating these the self.cut every time the enter keys hit, but obviously we haven't actually implemented render scene 1 or render scene 2, so those aren't going to actually do anything. The other issue that we're running into is there's no exit. So we do want to say if self.cut is greater than self.maxcut, we want to basically nuke it by doing self.game.event equals none, and that's going to nuke this event. So we're going to copy this and do some more rendering. So let's just copy that to everyone. So what dialogue should it be? Let's just say, hello, I am the prof. And we're going to say chose. I can't spell wisely. ... So there's the first scene. If we hit enter, it goes to the second one. And if we hit enter again, it goes to the third. If we hit enter again, it should remove itself. And we can run through that over and over again. We could also, I don't know, somewhere we should probably keep a track of did that event run or not. If it did, we don't want to show it again, but I'm not going to do that now. Okay, so now that we have the professor event going fine, we would like to allow us to actually pick one of those Pokemon for our player. So we've added in those kind of Pokeballs in that lab as an NPC. Obviously they're not moving, they're not really NPCs, but we're going to treat them as if they are. So we're going to do if npc.name starts with, and let's go back to what that actual name was. So monster cage underscore starter. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to create a new event. It's going to equal to, just call it pick monster event. It's going to take in the game. So it's going to take in the game screen, the player, or the game, the player, and the NPC. And just like with the prof event, we need to go ahead and add a new Python file for this, and we will call this the pick underscore monster underscore event. We'll just copy the prof event for now. Update the name of it. And remember, I think the other addition was NPC, so NPC is going to get passed in there. So we want to set the screen. We want to set the game. That's fine. The image we're not going to set yet. Dialogue we do want. And I don't think we'll need these. We'll just comment those out for now. So what we're going to do in this this event is we're going to pass in the NPC. Now remember, these NPCs just come from this config. So basically, it's what are our starters. These starters map to a specific Pokemon that can be picked. So that's going to be in monsters, and I've chosen the chicken, which will evolve into a chick, into a chicken, into an elephant, and then we have a frog, into a snake, into a crocodile, and we have a rabbit, into a dog, into a rhino. So those are going to be the 3 starters that we have, at least for now. You can set your own. So in the event, we want to use our monster factory that we created, I believe, in the previous tutorial, and we're going to set the monster based on that. So what we're going to say is if the NPC that we got passed in, and we can actually rename this to monster because that's what it is. Monster.name is equal to, and let's grab this first one. So if it's equal to this name, then we want to set our self.monster equal to the monster factory, which I think in order to do that, we need to actually create an instance of the monster factory. So we're creating an instance of this class. And we're going to say, now that we have this, we know it's going to be 01, which again I said was that chicken, which is index 1 on our monster config. So we're going to create monster. Now, this create monster in our monster factory creates a random monster. So we want one that doesn't create a random monster, but instead creates a monster based on an index passed in, which matches to one of these guys. And we'll base it on the config, which is this config monster. We've added all the information, the name. This is not a real one. That's 0. So 1 would be chick, 2 chicken, 3 elephant, 4 frog, 5 snake, etc., etc. So we go to the monster factory. We're just going to copy that method, and we're going to create a new one, create monster, call it underscore index. So this one's going to, all it's going to really take in is a index. So here we're going to say monster is equal to, and a new monster class, and then we're going to pass in all the values that are needed. So we can directly call config monster, and we can go to the monsters object and pass in the index. So what's that going to give us? So we go to the monsters config, which is an array. We pass in the index, so these all line up, 0, 1, etc. So we're passing in the index from the event to the monster factory. So call monsters index, and what does monster take? Monster takes a monster type, and a random number. What's this random number? This is the this maps to the image, so that's just going to be index in our case. So we go index monster underscore type, and then I think we can just pass in index. And then for some reason we're keeping track of count, so just to be consistent with that, we'll increment that. I don't think this is really important, but and then we're going to return the monster that we created. All right, so this pick monster event is now going to be creating a monster with index 1 if it's the NPC that we've hit is equal to this. So we can then change these. Pass in 2 instead of 3, or instead of 1, sorry. These can be elifs. Fix that name. And that should also be a self. So we're going to use the same structure that we used with the cut for now, but right now there's only one scene, so we can get rid of these for now, and we can get rid of these. Now here in this scene, instead of talking, we're going to say you picked, and then we're actually going to draw a picture of the monster image. So we can draw it actually right after we draw the dialogue. Just do self.monster. Remember, up here in our constructor, we created a monster object, and that monster object already has an image property. So we can just directly draw that. And we can say where we want to draw it. So for now, it'll just be 100, 100. So same thing here, so we will need to define that. I think self.maxCut is going to be 0, or I guess it would be 0, wouldn't it? But we're not going to increment the cut in this one. Instead, what we're going to do so what we're going to do is we're going to actually draw this you picked a little bit higher up, about 50 pixels higher, and then we're going to draw another font which is just saying, are you sure? Are you sure? And the user will pass in a Y or an N for yes or no, and then we'll draw that one slightly lower down at 400. That's the y-axis. So I'm going to say, are you sure? And if the user hits a Y, then they will be sure, and that will be their starter Pokemon. If they hit an N, then that would be false. So that's going to be an L if event dot key is equal to pygame dot k underscore, we said y. Then what we're going to do, we're going to say self dot player dot monster strs dot append monsters dot append, should work, self dot monster. So we're just giving the player the monster that they're picking, and then we're going to pop the we will pop the event off the game so that there is no event. And then same thing, but if they say no with an N, we're just going to pop the event off and not assign the monster. Now, we only want these scenes to happen. Oh, we have to assign the event to the game. We only want these to happen if the player doesn't have a monster. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to add in, just for keeping this if statement simple and not too complicated, don't want too much logic in these if statements. We're going to add in, we're going to extract these to their own methods. So we'll just call, say, def handle underscore prof underscore event. And it's going to take in the same thing as these. And then same thing here. So handle pick monster event. Take that logic, paste it in there, and then just call that. And then in each of these methods, what we're basically going to say is if player dot monsters return. So I'm actually want to be a little bit more explicit on here. So we're going to say length player monsters is not 0. Can I do that? Could just do that too. So basically, if the player already has a monster, we don't want, at this point, any of these events firing off. Okay, so that's a lot of code. Let's give it a run and see what happens. Let's just make sure that that player actually has that array. It does. All right, so let's give it a go. So if we go up here, there's our professor event, and then if we go here, bum, bum. So let's see, self.id. So we actually aren't calling the correct method here. It should be create monster underscore index. Now that we are actually calling the correct method, this should work. Let's give it another run. So here we go, saying you picked the chicken, are you sure? If we hit N, then we should still be able to fire off these events. We can check out each starter. Ooh, that's an older font. So actually, mistake here was number 2 cage starter does not map to the number 2 starter Pokemon. That's actually going to be Mr. Frog, which is number 4, and number 7, which is the rabbit. Okay, so 4 and 7. And also we want to add the name in here. So we'll just say plus string self.monster.name. So monster object has no attribute name. That doesn't seem right. So we should be passing that in. Now we could just get that from the config monster. So we'll do self.name equals config monster.monsters, the index, which is going to be ID, and the name property. So it's now displaying the correct ones and the correct name. So let's go with a frog. So we hit yes and it crashes. So we pass in the player, but we're not assigning it. We can fix that. So we were walking around in the lab. We determined if Pokemon should be found, and we did find one. But we shouldn't be finding Pokemon inside a building. So what we need to do is we need to go to the, let's see, go to config, and there's this monster types array that I've added. So if we're on any of these, which I think is grass, water, sand, and forest, I don't know. Right now, grass is the only one that matters. We're going to say if you're on any of those, then, or if you're not in that array, then just return. So that will look like if map tile not in config dot monster types, just return. And that will fix that crash. Now let's try again. So we now have our Froggy, and we're allowed to escape. So now, we can go back into battle. Whoa, that's very, very... Oh, okay. Man, we're hitting them a lot. Okay, so next up, let's actually add in this, this building. So if we go to our images, and go to rooms, maybe not the best title for that folder, but this is the one we want, 04. And we can go to our config and go to our map config, and we'll see the buildings here, and the sprite is already set at 04 for this research building. So we're going to render this in our map view. So in our map view, we're actually going to load it. So after we assign kind of all the tiles, what we're going to say is map underscore config is equal to config dot map config. Sorry, I said room config dot map config. And the index will be the file name. Now we're going to, right now our player always starts at just the top. So we're going to change that to player.position is equal to the map config start position. Copy that value over. We'll just take a look at that. So every map now has a start position. So this is where the player is going to start. And then we're going to loop through the, so we're going to say for building data in map underscore config buildings. We're going to create a new building based on that data. We say building equals a new building. This is an object we have not yet created. So we will grab the config sprite and the building data position. And the building data size. And then we're going to add that to the objects. So we're adding this to the objects in the map to render. Let's actually add that class in now. Building. It's going to be very similar to an NPC or a player, so we'll just copy the NPC. So we need the image name passed in, that's the first parameter. The position as an array. And the size. We already have position here. We will copy that over. We don't have, so we have image there. We're going to say self dot size is equal to size, copy the data. Self.image is going to, I think I removed it, but self.image is equal to pygame.image.load. We pass in the file name, which is going to be images/rooms/ and then we pass in a string version of image name plus PNG. We don't need to transform that image currently. There's no update. There's an update, but we actually need to just pass on it. There's no update position. There is a render. This needs to be changed. That's a yappy dog. Okay, and does this render need to change at all? Let me think. So we are actually going to render this image a specific size, but I will first run it to show you what it looks like without that change. Forgot to import that. Forgot the plus. So there's the bottom building, and you can see that we've started in a new location. And if we zoom up, we can see this building here. But so we actually want to scale these images. So we're going to do self.size times config.scale. So what we're basically, so self.size that we're passing in, which is coming from the config. So for this first building, we're saying the size is 4 by 5. And if we look at the map, we can see that it's going to be 4 wide and 5 high. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going to take 4 by 5 and multiply that by the scale that we're using, which is defined in our config file. So that's going to be the size 0. It's going to be the X width, and the Y width, or the height, will be size 1 times that config. And it's gone. It's gone. So that is actually supposed to be a transform. So basically we take the image and we transform it. So we're going to say pygame.transform.scale. And we pass it the self.image and what we want to transform it to. You know, we could just do this on the when we're assigning it. So, oh, here's our transform here already. Whoops. So yeah, we just need pygame transform scale. Yeah. So that should fix that. And you can see that the buildings are now scaling right. So I think there's a door here, but I haven't actually set up that room. So it just crashes on us. Basically, it's not set up in the config. So we probably could add that in. We could just add in like a dummy room for now. I don't want to design it out fully, but it's going to be in the room config 01. copy that. So basically it's 01, comma, 02, and then we would need to actually add the room. I guess for now I'll just add the same thing. So you can see we didn't actually update the exit position of this room. So that's why when we go in here and then we exit, we get to the lab. Next thing I'd like us to do is when we go up here, it'd be nice if we could go to the second map. So to do that, we're going to go back to our determine game events. That's becoming a very massive method. And we are going to, before we determine if we found a Pokemon, we're going to basically loop through the exit positions in game.map.exit positions. Now that doesn't exist yet, but it's going to come in from the config. So let's look at the config. We have map config and we have exits here. So we're going to load those up in our map object. When we load a map, we load the map config, and then we're going to say basically for exit position in map config exits. And we are going to append this exit position to a array. So we'll just call it exit underscore positions dot append. And we just put the exit position right in there. This needs to be set in the constructor. Equals to an empty array. And then back into that event handler, we're going to loop through all those exit positions that we just set. Self.map.exit positions. And we're going to say if these are equal, so we're going to say if self.player.position is equal to exit position. So basically they've gone to this exit position that's defined in the config file. So then if that's the case, we're going to load a new map file. This is just a key. So we're going to say exit position and map. So let's go back to that config. See the exit position defines a map and the location. So the map, so basically 01, the exit position is at the 3x location and the 0y location, and it goes to map 2. Map 2 is right here. Okay, so we get the map file location, and then we do the same thing as when we loaded our other map. We say map equals map game.screen. We're going to call map.load. This is a map, not a room. So we're going to pass it the map file, which is just, in this case, 02 as a string. And we also have to pass it to player. Sorry, this is not game, this is self, because we are in the game. So self.maps, we are going to pop the existing one. So we have this array of maps. The existing map is going to come off, and we are going to put a new map onto there. It's equal to the new map we created. And self.maps.append the new map. Okay, let's see if that worked. And it did not. All right, so the reason why it's not actually working is because we have this if statement. We're saying if the map tile is a road, just return. So none of this logic happens. Now that was fine up until now, but it's actually not necessary because that was just put in place to make sure that we can walk on a road without running into a monster. So we already have that logic covered here. We don't need this road logic anymore. Let's remove it, resave, and we can rerun now. So we will go back up to that position. Now when I go up, we should go to the next map. Now we do. And up we go. Now this map's a little bit different because it's longer on the width side than on the height side. And in an early video, we did camera scrolling on the y-axis, but not on the x-axis. So let's handle that now. If I can find out where we're actually doing that. So I think that's in the map object, self.determine camera. So we have all the logic in place for the height scaling. We now want to add the same logic for the x-axis. It's going to be exactly the same, just, you know, opposite axis. Very helpful comment. So we're just changing all this to the x position, x position, x position, x position, x position. So this has to be the screen width. And I explained all this logic, I hope, in the video where we did the Y one, so I'm not going to go over it now. Quite honestly, I've forgotten it all. But basically, we have this camera that's going to put an offset on where we're actually drawing from, and we do some logic to make sure that we're never drawing kind of off screen. So we're just doing the exact same thing, making sure we turned all the zeros on this, on the ones on this camera array to 0. Looks like we got it all here. So now the fun part of finding all our render methods. So on our render method, well, basically any render method, we use this camera offset and multiply it by the scale and then offset it from what we're drawing. So we're going to do the same thing for the x-axis on all of these. We just need to change that to 0. So we're going to use this in quite a few places, so we're going to copy that. And basically need to go to all our render methods. So that's the map. There's going to be one for building. There's going to be one for the NPC. There will be one for the player. I think that's everything. Let's see if that's working or not. So player object has no attribute camera because the camera got passed into the renderer. Probably same thing here. Make sure that the room is still rendering. Ooh, look at that. So I think, I don't really mind that, keeping it centered like that, but that's slightly different than what we were doing for the y-axis, where you could only go to the top corners. So I think something went wrong there. I'll take another look. But yeah, so that's wrong. That's wrong. Ah, yes, here it is. So here we're taking the length of the map array, which is going to give us how many rows. So in this case, it would give us 34. But we want for the x to be the width of one of these arrays. So go back in here, it's going to be the length of the map array at index 0. That's going to be another array, and that's what we want there. I don't know if that's going to fix all our issues. Looks like it might have. That still looks good. Let's see how this works. Perfect. So that's acting as expected. Whoa, that was not. So we didn't update the start position. That's wrong too. All right, let's, so when we go in here and then we go back to the map's original start position. If you remember, that's in our config. Yeah, so we can fix that currently by updating this start position. Yeah, so what we want here is we actually want to add that to the exit. So we basically want the this start position to be set based on the exit's start position. If that makes sense. So I don't really know how to name this, but new start position. This is basically when we are going back to, like going from O2, map O2 to map O1, what's going to be the new start position. And it's going to be the exit position, probably +1. And then we're going to have to do the same thing for this. So it's basically when we're exiting O1 to go into O2, what's going to be the new start position? So it is going to be this. That's not going to change anything, but, and then we can go to that, config file, no, to our game, to our handler. And when we hit one of these, we're going to create the map, and then we're actually going to, so what we're going to do is we're going to say we've created the map, and then we're going to do a map.load, but we're actually going to say before we load, we go to config, map config, set the index to the map file, and we're going to say start position is equal to, we're going to say exit position new start position. So then when we call map.load, this will be the new start position that gets loaded. Yeah, that's a little Yankee, but I don't want to spend too much time on this right now. So we enter the new map, then we go back, and we're back where we were. Good enough for now. Could fix that as well, but that's okay. Cool little portal. Okay, the last thing I want to do is update the graphics on this battle, because this looks terrible. And there we have it all done. So since we're already at such an incredible length for this video, I did the reskinning of the battle off screen, and this is what it looks like. You can check out the code in the Git repository. There were a couple other changes that needed to be made. Mainly I had to assign the level based on the monster config level start. It's coming in from this level start. So I had to assign that in the monster class at the start, and I also had to assign the base health. And then also the config this battle health bar width that originally had in was 202. It should be 102. But yeah, so besides that, that's basically it. So we can still do the same thing. It's just you hit enter and you attack him down, and that's it. So still not really a functional battle system. Okay guys, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I would love to know what you think I could do better in these tutorials. I would love to take your suggestions, and I would so appreciate it if you subscribe and hit that like button.